Here.
Councilmember Bilbray.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Patton.
Here.
Mayor Janney.
Here.
And Councilmember Spriggs
Here.
is here.
Could you all please stand and join me? I'm asking Commander to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance this evening.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Moving on to agenda changes. Ms. Bragg?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to pull item 2.3 for just an update on it, discussion.
Are you okay with taking that at the end of the meeting then?
Certainly.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hall, did you have one item?
Yes, Mayor, I would like to ask the City Council to suspend the closed session for tonight for a future date to be determined.
All right, and then I've been informed that item 5.1, one of our infamous Eagle Scout projects, is going to be delayed. Is that 5.1 or 5.2, Mr. Levine? 5.1, so we will delay 5.1 to a future agenda item too. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. Yes, Mr. Spriggs?
I would like to ask that 2.6 be pulled, given that it has to do with testing of the beach water, which is a very important matter that may be of public interest. I hope there'll be some public left here after the meeting to hear that item briefly reviewed by staff. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So then what we're being asked, and I make a motion to take items 2.2 and 2.6 at the end of the agenda, and
2.3.
2.3, I apologize, 2.3 and 2.6 at the end of the agenda, and the staff is asked to delay item 5.1 on the closed session. And the closed session. And the closed session. In a second. In a second. Could we please vote?
Motion carried unanimously.
Thank you. Moving on to Mayor Council reimbursements, disclosures, and community announcements. Ms. Bragg. Mr. Spriggs.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. At the most recent meeting of the International Boundary and Water Commission Citizens Forum, we had a very interesting discussion on the status of the most recent, or what they call a treaty minute. The minute is below a treaty level. It's within the existing International Boundary Water Commission treaty. And this minute will provide for, on both sides of the border, cooperation on the cleaning up of the Tijuana River basin with regard to sediment and trash flows and various other items that are categorized as a framework for cooperation. Right now, the Citizens Forum, of which I'm a member, is interested in making comments on that minute that would get a little bit more specific on the kinds of projects that would be implemented. And there is some controversy. It's not serious, but it is significant on the degree of specificity that this minute should entail. The Mexican government seems to want a lot more general terms. The American side, including the Citizens Forum, would like to see some specific actions started earlier in the process rather than just creating a general framework. So those discussions are ongoing, and we're still in the process of commenting on the draft minute as it stands right now. So that's really what I wanted to bring everybody up to date on. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Bilbray? Mr. Pat?
Yeah, it's real quick. Just thank you for the successful Sun and Sea Festival we just had. It took a team of volunteers, staff, organizers to make this happen. Of course, the sheriff and the lifeguards did a great job. And there's some folks, I hope Mr. Levine is out there listening, some folks that kind of are behind the scenes, Public Works and Tidelands people. I've talked to a lot of them. What a great job they did keeping our whole area nice and clean and effective, and it was a great event. So I just want to shout out to the behind the scenes crew for what a great job they did.
Thank you. I also like to say that we have a public meeting that the Navy is putting together here across the street to Marina Vista Center on August 13th, and this deals with Naval Base Coronado Coastal Campus, the environmental impact statement. I encourage everybody to attend and give their inputs. That's what the Navy would like to hear, is what we think down here at that forum too. So that's August 13th at 5 p.m. at the Marina Vista Center across the street. Mr. Hall, do you have anything?
Yeah, we just wanted to let everybody know that there are a couple of employment opportunities with the city right now. So if you know someone that's looking for a job, have them check out our website. And there's also an opportunity to serve the community on the Parks and Recreation Committee, and we are taking applications for that as well. So we just want to let everybody know about those opportunities.
And just to remind, we took action to reestablish the Parks and Recs Committee. We're leaving the period open a little bit more to make sure that we get enough people excited about joining it. So the time open, Ms. Ald, is a little bit longer than our normal announcements.
I believe it closes Friday, August 29th at 5 o'clock.
So if you know anybody that's interested in that, I think that could be pretty exciting for us to help some stuff out. Mr. Spriggs?
Just to follow up on what Councilmember Patton mentioned, we have a few people in the room who were responsible for organizing and supporting the Sun and Sea Festival, but I think it would really be appropriate, considering that we really got a lot of community support and community participation, to take an opportunity at a future meeting, not too far from now, to really do something more formal in terms of recognition of this type of citizen involvement, where they really stood up and brought Sun and Sea back to Imperial Beach. And I think really the same thing also for the cooperation that we saw with the city and the leadership by people in the community on the fireworks issue as well, which was brought back largely by the initiative of citizens of our community. And that's the kind of relationship I think we want to encourage with the community, is for citizens to step forward, shoulder a good portion of the burden, and not leave it all to City Hall to do. And we should recognize.
Well, I think we should take that into consideration, and just because I know that you weren't able to make the mayor's breakfast that weekend, that was really the theme. Oh, I'm sorry. The theme really was volunteers in the city of Imperial Beach. There are so many of them. They do so much, and not just summertime, but year-round. But we can consider something on this one. I agree. It was pretty fantastic the way they pulled it off. Moving on to public comments on items not on the agenda, Ms. Holt.
We have no speaker slips at this time.
Thank you. Then I would move on to consent calendar, items 2.1 through 2.6, with the exception of 2.3 and 2.6. Do I have a motion? We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Can we please vote?
Motion carried unanimously.
Our next item on the agenda would be 5.2, which is an Eagle Scout project. The young man looks like he's having a little trouble getting here, so I'm going to take the liberty and move that off into the agenda until he does arrive. I know that we like to take those as early in the agenda as possible, because those young folks should be doing some other things as well. So moving on to item 5.3, Mr. Hall.
Mayor and Council, we have representatives from the Airport Authority with us tonight to review the work that they have done in updating our land use compatibility plan. And so while they're pulling up their presentation, I wanted to let you know that they've had a chance to have a public meeting that was held in the Marina Vista Center, and they've received a lot of comments there, as well as they did come in and brief staff on the presentation that you're going to see tonight. There is no action that's being asked by this group from the City Council. They just wanted to provide you with the information so you're familiar with it.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, honorable members of the Imperial Beach City Council. My name is Ed Gowans, and I'm a senior airport planner with the Airport Authority. I've been the primary planner that's been working on developing this airport land use compatibility plan, and I'm here to give you just an informational presentation about the content and solicit your feedback on any details on which you wish to comment.
Excuse me if I interrupt you at this
Sure.
point. When you say solicit comments, on what part of this plan are, when we make comments, is it going forward into it, or have you already established this plan? Or
We've developed a draft which has been circulated in a period of public review, which we notified affected residents about and advertised in local newspapers. We will be glad to take any other additional comments before we actually take this forward to our Airport Land Use Commission for final adoption. So if you have any feedback or anything that you'd like us to look further into, we'd be glad to entertain that.
okay, thank you.
Okay. We often use the acronym ALUCP to designate this. This stands for Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan. It's a land use guidance document that is for local agencies like the City of Imperial Beach, for property owners, developers near airports. The purpose of an ALUCP is to protect the safety of the public, property on the ground. It also protects aircraft in flight and airports from encroachment by incompatible uses. The reason why we do this is because it's required by state law. It applies only to new development, and I cannot underscore that enough. It does not apply to existing development at all. We have no jurisdiction over any use that is existing. It's only guidance for development of new uses. It has no effect as well on the operations of any airport. We have no jurisdiction to federal installations or any land owned by the United States government or any agencies thereof. Applies only to off-airport properties. We have to, by law, develop our ALUCP based upon what's called the ACUs. The ACUs stands for Air Installation Compatible Use Zones. It's a document that's a study that's developed by the Department of Defense for military airfields. The ACUs for North Imperial Beach was released in 2012. And by state law, we have to be consistent with the noise and safety standards that are from this ACUs. The body that is authorized to deal with this is the Airport Land Use Commission, or ALUC. Every county in California has an ALUC, an Airport Land Use Commission. The ALUC for San Diego County is the San Diego County Regional Airport Authority, which is the operator of San Diego International Airport. We don't own or operate any other airport in the county, but we serve as a land use planning agency for all 16 airports, 12 public use and 4 military that are within the county of San Diego. And to give you an idea of what that jurisdiction looks like, these are the airport influence areas for all of the 16 airports. And I'll explain a little more in the presentation what an airport's influence area is. The Airport Land Use Commission has several responsibilities under the statute. They adopt ALUCPs to ensure compatible land use within the vicinity of airports. They review land use projects, plans, and regulations for consistency with those ALUCPs. And local agencies refer those projects to the ALUC for that review for a consistency determination. A local agency means any city, the unincorporated county, any school district, any community college district, any utility district. By law, all of those entities have responsibility to refer projects to the Airport Land Use Commission for our consideration for consistency determination. Now, to get into what an ALUCP consists of, there are 4 compatibility factors which comprise that: overflight, airspace protection, noise, and safety. And this is just an illustrative map. I'll explain in further detail what those mean. Begin with the noise compatibility factor. This is the noise compatibility factor, the contours, exposure contours, as mapped from the Navy ACUs. So these established by decibel community noise equivalent level what the exposure is beyond the base. The base property is grayed out, as you can see. Only the blue contour lines bleed off of the base. We have no jurisdiction on base property. We have no control over the operation of the base property. So it's only those areas which bleed off. We do our compatibility reviews by a 5 decibel contour range, and we designate it using sort of a traffic light system, whereas green is a compatible use, yellow is conditionally compatible, and red is incompatible. And as a sample, and I have the full matrices as well if you would like printouts, this is just a snapshot of a compatibility matrix as it exists in the AOCP that shows, for example, single-family homes in the 60 to 65 decibel contour are conditionally compatible with a sound attenuation level of 45 decibels, whereas 65 and above would be incompatible. The gray columns represent property that's on base. Those contours exist on base. We have no jurisdiction over that. So what are the real off-base impacts to property beyond Nulph Imperial Beach? There is a part of the 60 to 65 contour which lies north of base property. This is occupied by 40 existing single-family residences on which it has no effect. Remember, we do not have an effect on any existing use. It's only if a newly proposed use were to go into that contour would it become subject to the AOCP. If a tear down of a home was proposed, or if someone proposed a second dwelling unit, allowed by state law with their units, that would be subject to the plan, which would require sound attenuation. And it is worth mentioning that California Title 24 energy construction standards already provide the required level of noise reduction. So there are absolutely no extraordinary measures that any homeowner would have to undertake in order to comply with the plan should they build a new home. To go over the safety compatibility factor, there is a little bit of accident potential zone 1 which exudes into the city of San Diego. This is in the San Diego National Wildlife Refuge. There are no part of the city of Imperial Beach that lies within any safety zone off base. The same sort of compatibility matrix applies, however, for safety standards. Same sort of traffic light system of green, yellow, and red to distinguish between compatible, conditionally compatible, and incompatible uses. And again, there is no portion of any safety zone within the city of Imperial Beach. The third factor is airspace. This already exists completely independent of our airport land use compatibility plan. We have no jurisdiction to establish or modify the airspace. That's governed by the Federal Aviation Administration. We simply, as a courtesy, map this in our document to provide guidance to local jurisdictions in terms of complying with federal airspace. These are imaginary surfaces of flight procedures that are established by federal aeronautical standards. And what the FAA requires is that developers and designers, those who sponsor projects, must submit construction proposals to the FAA for review. The burden lies with those individuals who wish to construct. It is not a burden upon the local agency, and it's not a requirement that our agency lies. The idea is, though, that a jurisdiction should require a copy of that determination prior to issuance of building permits. If you're familiar, as many I'm sure are in the region, with the infamous Sun Road building, which was built in the city of San Diego some years ago near Montgomery Field, that building was built much too high because there were no municipal procedures in place to require the FAA determination prior to issuance of permits. So the city faithfully issued a permit to the developer based upon compliance with the municipal requirements, and they ran afoul of FAA requirements. It was too high, and the building had to be modified to comply with that. To prevent that scenario, we advise jurisdictions to require a copy of the FAA determination prior to issuance of permits. And this is a sample of the determination of no hazard to air navigation that the Federal Aviation Administration typically issues for projects according to their review. There are, of course, other potential airspace hazards beyond just height. There's glare, glint, distracting lighting, thermal plumes, dust, vapor, smoke, bird attractants. All of these can potentially become hazardous to pilot vision, obstruct the potential for flight in the area. We also advise that these be looked at within that airspace boundary so that those can be referred to our agency should they be, to the extent that they are incompatible or could be a hazard to flight. The fourth and final factor is overflight. And this is based upon the flight routes as provided by the Navy. It's also established by noise complaints. These clusters you see are they're identified noise clusters, where I think the yellow represent about 1 to 5 complaints, and the orange represent about 5 to 15 complaints. Then we place the other flight procedures, the turret procedures, and once you build all of these factors up, this establishes what is called an overflight notification area. So it combines airspace surfaces, flight track data, noise complaints, and what it involves, it's an enhanced level of real estate disclosure and buyer tenant awareness. California state law already mandates that real estate sales professionals have to disclose the proximity of an airport whenever they're involved in a real estate transaction. This just goes above and beyond a level to require that residents have that notification of airport proximity. And there are a number of different ways that this can be accomplished. That there can be either a requirement laid upon those properties to record an overflight agreement with the county recorder when a new house is constructed. Remember, it doesn't apply to existing homes. It's only new residential land uses. The city can either do an overlay zone to zone as a form of notice, or it can add something as part of a building permit notice. Remember, this won't, even though this area, and I'll go back, this area does encompass the entire city of Imperial Beach, it only applies to new residences. So if these existing residents are not affected by this requirement at all. And just for your information, this is the language that is taken directly from the state statutes that discloses that you may be near an airport, and these are what the potential effects you may be subject to. So remember, earlier in my presentation, I talked about those airport influence areas. That's when you combine all of those component factors: noise, safety, airspace, and overflight. And I've got a sort of a built-in sort of slide that shows progressively how those things are done. So here we have the safety factor. Here we have the noise factor, the overflight factor, the airspace factor, and then you put them all together, you have an airport influence area. And the distinguish between the two colors, the sort of darker red color is what is called Review Area 1. Those are the projects built within those regions off base, not on base, would be referred to the Airport Land Use Commission if it's a new project, new construction for our review. Beyond that, Review Area 2 is only just the airspace and overflight, which the jurisdiction implements. That doesn't require referral to our agency. In terms of how the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan is developed procedurally, this lays out the framework. We have sort of a technical data gathering process, an analysis of that data, relying on what is provided to us by the Navy and the ACUS. We do public community outreach. We held a meeting January 14th at the Marina Vista Center. It was noticed to the neighbors, advertised, and so forth to solicit input on the plan. We develop a draft ALUCP and put that out for public review, which we did during the month of July. Same scenario, we did advertise that and sent notices to the 40 homes that are in that 60 to 65 decibel contour, and preparing an environmental document. And in this particular case, our environmental document, we're proposing to use the common sense exemption, categorical exemption, under the California Environmental Quality Act. We've used this for Camp Pendleton when we did the ALUCP for it, and it's largely because the effects are just they're non-existent because the area is already built out, or it's public parkland in the Tawana River estuary valley. There's no potential for displacement of any uses because there are no uses in those contours that are prohibited or considered incompatible. So it will not induce growth impacts. It will not have an effect. The only impact, if you can call it an impact, is the residential awareness provision, and that's simply a notice that involves no physical change in the environment. So it's our position that a categorical exemption will satisfy the California Environmental Quality Act requirements. Once we do that, we take the exemption, we prepared the draft AOUCP with all the commentary, we present it to the Airport Land Use Commission for adoption. Once they adopt that, it takes effect immediately, and we work with the affected local agencies in terms of implementing, and that usually involves working with the city staff, setting up procedures if need be in terms of how they want to refer projects, mapping tools, etc., that will assist in our mutual review. The public review period, even though it closed, we will still obviously entertain any comments that you may have or the public may wish to have up until we are able to adopt it. We are anticipating potentially a September consideration of the nullified BAUCP, contingent upon what kind of commentary we will receive from this presentation. In terms of local implementation, the state law, the state California Government Code, requires that affected jurisdictions fold in the AOUCPs into their zoning code, into their general plan. And the statute actually specifies that process should be done in 180 days. I don't know if there's a jurisdiction in California that can adopt a general plan in 180 days, but we've never held our brethren agencies to that hard and fast deadline. But the idea is that you will continue to refer projects to our agency up until such time as you have integrated them into your general plan. You're not required to do that. For example, the city of Chula Vista has elected not to do that, and that's okay. That just simply means that as projects come down the pipe, they individually refer to each project to our agency. The city of San Diego, for example, has chosen to implement, which means that they have integrated the applicable AOUCPs into their zoning code. So they do their own reviews. They've integrated all those procedures into their permit procedure so that they accomplish the review, the same review that we would as an agency. So you're welcome to choose whichever option works best for you, and we're amenable to either one. If you have any comments, that are sort of generic web address is aoucpcomments@san.org, and that concludes this presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, do we have any speaker slips in this item?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I'll start off on something. I know that it says there's only 40 homes affected of it.
Yes, sir.
It's not really realistic. Maybe it fits a standard that says X amount of dB of this and all that. The city of Imperial Beach gets affected by this military installation down there. We even get approximately, the commander probably knows this, about 3 o'clock every morning. We get a heavy lift cargo flight that comes overheaded to North Island. I think it's almost every day. There's a lot of effects that might not meet the standards. And as a representative of the people of Imperial Beach, I don't really think it's fair to say there are no effects.
Fair enough.
I know by maybe your laws or something like that, but once in a while we have to consider something beyond the written law and things like that. So I take a little bit offense on that. I understand that that meets your standards, but I don't think it's fair to those that might be the 41st home out there to say, oh, just because you're 6 feet out of something here, you don't hear anything. So I consider that
point well taken.
And then the question on the adoption to our general plan and things like that, and maybe I need some of our own staff. What would be the cost difference if we had it within our own plans to be able to approve something in that particular zone versus sending it to the airport?
The airport authority does not charge any fees for our review, so there's really no cost involved.
And then my last question before, I know Mr. Spriggs might probably have some. The public comments and the meeting that you had across the street back in January,
Yes, sir.
what were the comments from the people of Imperial Beach or those surrounding us?
I think there were just questions. There weren't any direct comments in terms of the content of the plan. There weren't any the contours as they are. They're based upon a 20-year modeling cycle, so that's how they're established. So there's a sort of a scientific basis, technical basis to those.
But I mean, as far as the public, as they didn't really have anything that you had to go back and put into the EIR or anything
No,
like that.
no,
right?
sir.
Mr. Spriggs, did you have some questions on that?
Mayor, thank you. Mr. Gowans, is it?
Gowans.
Gowans. Thank you very much for the presentation. Just a comment and then a question. Taking off of the mayor's comment, a couple years ago we had a substantial amount of public concern raised in this chamber regarding plans of the Navy to substantially increase the volume of flights out of Nulf and between the base here and Coronado, North Island. And there was an EIS. We weren't very happy with that EIS because, getting to the mayor's point, it really, in our view, unanimously on the council and the community understated the impacts, the noise and other impacts of the existing level, much less the planned increased level of activity. And again, don't get me or us wrong. We are, we're a military community to a large extent. We live with the base. We always have, and that's not really the issue. I think the issue is fairness and accuracy in portraying what the impacts are and what the community has to live with and has lived with, so that when there are these plans for expansion, there's a baseline of understanding what the impacts are better than what has existed up to this point. And that gets to the 60, 65 decibel issue. There may be 58, 59, 50 decibel impacts or even lower that are still significant all around the community that do have an impact. So, and then when you increase the frequency of activity, then what becomes an occasional interference with a television program or a conversation or a picnic or whatever becomes very frequent. So these are real human impacts, and I just really like the document. I mean, it may be too late for comment, but it really doesn't talk very much about the human impact, and it should, because there is a substantial impact here in this community that we live with, but it should be recognized. The question that I had, and you may or may not be able to answer this question, is the last such sort of assessment or report was I don't know, 15 years ago, maybe.
The last ACUS, perhaps, is
right.
I believe it's 1989.
89. Are you in a position to highlight any major changes or different impacts that this would have compared to that prior report that we, obviously we've been living under?
We can certainly obtain that information. I do know that the noise contours have in essence pulled in, that they're reduced from what they were in 1989. That there are fewer homes that are impacted by the contours from 1989's ACUS versus the one in 2012.
So it's generally an improved impact.
Yes, sir. That would,
even though there may be more activity.
Potentially. Remember, the noise contours they're an average, which is a point well taken, that they are not single event representations, but they're an average over a period. So that's why they have that fluctuating. So that's how they settle out in an average situation.
So just to add the one piece, we would have to go back to pull more information to give you the exact difference. The biggest change between 1989's and the one in 2012 was the type aircraft. And when fixed wing were allowed, they're still allowed, but when they were utilized here much more frequently back in the day with the seaplanes and everything else, the noise margin there was much greater than with helicopters. So that's the biggest difference on why they were sucked in, as he mentioned.
Mr. Patton?
Yeah. Real quick, is there any existing programs that offer assistance or rebates for new windows or people affected in these areas?
I'd have to refer that to the city staff. Our agency is not in the land use permitting business, so we don't have any
Okay, so you don't
any
know
involvement in that. No,
that's never happened
No.
before in here.
but remember the California Title 24 energy construction standards that all houses have to comply, all residential construction has to comply with, already would provide the level of noise reduction that is required by this plan.
And then complaints. Who would a citizen contact if they did have a complaint?
Regarding the noise generated by the Navy, they'd have to contact the Navy facility. I believe the community plans liaison officer.
And that's information that we can get a hold of, I'm sure.
Yes, that's absolutely public information.
And then maybe Commander, is that right?
Yes, sir, that is correct. And if you just search for the Naval Base Coronado noise complaint, there's a web address. It's very easy to fill out. I will use this opportunity to say this because I am one of the ones that reviews these. The biggest thing that is difficult for us is detailed information, because we do as much research that we can with our folks who are working at the time. They can evaluate who was airborne. So I understand folks' reluctance, but we're not coming after anyone. We just want to help the problem. But if I don't have as accurate of a time and as accurate of information, I tend to read things that are every day 60 to 70 helicopters, that's very difficult for us to go measure with anything. So as much of an accurate address and then time, specifically the time, because then we can go back and try to review. We can work with the with SoCal FAA, and they can help us pull radar tapes just to look and see if, no kidding, one of our folks got out of line. So the website is there, so the most accurate information is the best.
Excellent, thank you.
Ms. Bragg?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Gowans. I would like to ask you to return to one slide, and that was the complaint slide.
Sure.
Just to reiterate what my colleagues have already spoken to, is that those complaints appear to be all over the city,
Sure.
not just coming from 40 homes directly to NOLF. So I hope that you can take that back with you. The other question that I have pertains to the residential awareness page. If you could bring that up.
Sure.
Would that only pertain to somebody who is building a new, let me understand, a new single-family residential? What about if it was a hotel? What if somebody was planning to use that as a vacation rental type unit? Would they have to release that information as well?
The state law requires disclosure in the sale of it, so it would only be the buyer who would be required to receive this disclosure. The overflight factor in the AOUCP would require that it be placed upon new residential property. So if someone constructed a new residence, this would either have to be given a building permit notice, or they'd have to record that notice on the deed of the property, or some other means such as an overlay zone that the city council would impose upon the city that says, thus, here you are noticed that the overflight affects you.
So it doesn't pertain to somebody who's just utilizing like a hotel room. They, like,
No, ma'am.
say C-180 would not have to say, we have some noise. They don't have to disclose that at that point.
That's correct.
Okay.
And the reason for that is the document that governs, remember this is a state mandate that we do the AOUCPs. This is governed by Caltrans Division of Aeronautics. That's the agency from the state that governs these rules. They have established what they call the California Airport Land Use Planning Handbook, or colloquially we typically refer it as the Caltrans Handbook. That lays out the guidance procedures for this, and it only specifies new residential So that's where that requirement derives from.
Okay, thank you.
I actually learned several new things this evening, and one of them was the official boundary of the North Base here. I didn't realize that it had a sort of triangular extension to the northwest, almost to Seacoast Drive. Is it possible to shed a little light, perhaps, on whether there's any reason for that, given that it's a federal and state reserve area, why that extension exists, and are there any implications for possible future activity in that extension of the official boundary of the base?
I'm not aware. This is just the information that was supplied to us by the Navy. These are the boundaries of U.S. government-owned property that is managed by the Department of Defense. I couldn't comment on any of their acquisition plans. So I'm unaware of that.
Okay, thank you.
I have one last thing, and I know our partners in Coronado have a little bit different issues with the consideration of AQs. Can you clarify something for me? The state of California is the only one that says use the military AQs for an airport land use compatibility plan. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr.
Somebody
Mayor.
in Sacramento wrote that into law for us?
That's correct. I think the Knight Act, I think, was what folded that into requirements.
We're dealing with the AQs, and I know the military's had an AQs way back before Sacramento came up with this brilliant idea.
Yes, sir.
But that's why Coronado is struggling so much with it, because we woke up in 2014 and said we got a new set of rules.
Fair enough.
Okay, thank you. I think that's it. Thank you very much for the
Thank you
presentation.
very much for your time.
And I see the young gentleman has arrived, so we're going to go move on to item 5.2. Is that correct, Mr. Levine?
Mayor, we need to get the presentation called up here, so
Okay.
give us a couple seconds to get that done, or have me
You're lucky,
as an expert.
young man, because I was going to have you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, but you were late, so the commander generously offered to step in for you.
Mayor, Council, I'd like to introduce to you Ryan Engelbrecht. You notice Ryan is almost the height of me. You should try to follow him, or see me try to follow him on a hike. It takes me about 20 steps to catch up with two of his, I think. Ryan has a proposal to you regarding an Eagle project that he would like to do within the city, and I'd like to turn it over to Ryan to go ahead and make the presentation to you.
Hi, my name is Ryan Engelbrecht, and here I'm going to show you a proposal for the service project that I'm going to do. And of course, I'm going to do the service project here in the Civic Center pertaining to the, you could see on the next slide, loading. By the hallway, there's a triangle area and a area on the side of the building that is necessarily, this is a patch of dead shrubs and dead grass, and it overall doesn't like give a clean or presentable image to the Civic Center. And so to the next page, we do the project description and the benefit of it, and what the goal is to remove the dead grass and shrubs from the triangle area and replace it with a set of pavers on a sand base. And on the area on the side of the building, we would replace with plants similar to the ones located in the front of the Civic Center. And this project will help benefit the overall clean image of the Civic Center and become more presentable to the employees and the public. The project start will be scheduled in early September, and the time to complete would be between 6 to 8 hours. The plants that we would use to put on the side of the building would, Hank and I took a variety of plants that, as you can see in front of the Civic Center, we used 2 of them. One of them is the Texas Ranger, which is the one on the top, and the other one is a Mexican bush sage plant, which is on the bottom. And total cost would be to plant all these and get them would be around an estimate of $150. And next slide. The materials would be, for the triangular area, would be roughly an estimate of 1,000 5.5 by 5.5 inch pavers, 200 bags of leveling sand, and also the new plants. The total cost for the materials would be about $1,850. And the supplies for the service project, we would need power equipment such as a masonry saw, a tamper or a vibrator, and ordinary supplies like wheelbarrows, shovels, rakes, brooms, loppers, and like garbage bags and tarps. And we would have a task force of about a couple of Boy Scouts, probably around 20 to 30 at most. And the total cost for these supplies would be around $300. But so the estimated cost for the total project, combining all of it, plus the equipment rental for the masonry saw, it would all add up to about $2,300 to get all this done. And that's my proposal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions?
Mayor, if I might just clarify, the site is on the driveway entrance here between City Hall and the sheriff's station, and it's the sheriff's station side of that entry that he portrayed to you.
Thank you.
Good presentation. First of all, thanks for coming up here and speaking to us. The old plants that are there existing, they're dying, they died. What's going to prevent these new ones not to die again? So
Well,
what are you going to do?
Right now, we're not sure, but apparently when they did remodel and renovate the front area, the irrigation was cut off. So that's why the drought appeared. But I believe that, I guess, proper maintenance, like watering the plants, because Tank told me that there's like this one plant, if I could move back. Yeah, the one plant in the triangular area, there's just somehow it's filled with life, and apparently Hank mentioned that someone who might love the plant likes to water it a lot, but
It looks great.
If I may, Councilmember embellish that, there is water along the edge of the fire station and the police station wall, the west wall, and we intend to put irrigation line through there for those plants. So it'll be a weep, if you will, or drip irrigation system. It's very similar to what you see in the front.
Good. I look forward to seeing it. Thank you.
Please, Mr. Spriggs.
Again, good presentation, and you know, it takes a little bit of presentational presence to not have your voice crack and that sort of thing when you're in front of all these intimidating people, all these other intimidating people. Mr. Levine, and you may also want to weigh in on this. The question of watering these plants sort of raises the broader issue of our landscaping approach for city property, and whether we really ought to be looking at beautification other than through plants that consume significant amounts of water, even though that's the most attractive, is to have greenery. Right now, a lot of the, all over San Diego County and including this community, people are cutting back on their landscaping and watering their landscaping because of restrictions and that sort of thing. So what's your thinking a little bit about the water consumption aspect of this, and how we can think about these projects a little differently regarding our entire effort to beautify municipal property?
Sure. We have in all of these projects and the projects that the department has done has been looking at plants that are pretty drought tolerant, plants that are have been successful with the drought tolerant landscape that we provided for them, like what you see in the front. The concerns for water is not, and by the state, is not prohibiting greenscape, but they are certainly encouraging us to try to use methods to reduce or install plants that require less water, and hopefully, other than that one turf area in Sports Park, which you authorized a couple weeks ago, all of these projects you're seeing are ones that they require very little water and are consistent with the state's mandate. If you look at the requirements right now that are proposed for Condition 2, I think it's called, by the County Water Authority, the use of drip irrigation is not part of the restrictions that are imposed on us. It's you're using the big lawn sprinkler kind of things and water going onto the streets. And we are very conscious of that and trying to be consistent with that when these proposals we're making to you.
Thank you. And I guess you're looking for direction from us to move forward to this project, Ms. Levine?
Yes, sir. We'd like to get to your comment and approval if you're okay with it.
Council? I think we have that, and thank you very much, Ryan. I think that was a great presentation.
Thank you.
And Mr. Levine, just on what Mr. Spriggs was saying, I know that we did the front of this building, we did Marina Vista Center. We've done quite a few of these, what I call zero-scape projects, and we took out a lot of water-intensive landscaping when we did that.
Yes.
Is that correct? Okay.
Yes, and yes. And the project that was just done over at 10th Street by the bikeway, that's all drought-tolerant plants.
I thought that most of the projects your folks from Troop 53 have done have actually kind of increased our amount of drought-tolerant landscaping right now.
It has, sir. Yes, sir. That's the objective.
Okay, thank you. Thank you again, Ryan. Moving on to item 5.4. We have Chris up here to inform us how we're doing on this one.
Yes, let me pull it up here really quick.
Mayor, if I could, Mr. Helmer, before you get started, I don't know if you were here at the beginning of the meeting, but an item was pulled off of consent. Are you going to be around to be able to discuss? Okay, good, thank you.
All right, good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm always happy to present the work that I'm doing here in the city. From the presentation that we had earlier from the airport, it kind of highlights where there's these, the state kind of requires plans for everything. And this is one such of them. I'm going to provide you an update on the development of our water quality improvement plan, and I'm going to review some of the requirements of the new municipal stormwater permit that was recently issued about a year ago from the Regional Water Quality Control Board, and hopefully at the end answer any questions you may have about the implementation of this new plan and maybe any of the future directions of the stormwater program. So the reason why the City of Imperial Beach has an environmental division and why the regions, or San Diego and Southern California regions, really have an equivalent, either an environmental division or a stormwater department, is to implement the requirements of the municipal stormwater permit. It's the requirements that's kind of integrated throughout the entire, at least every jurisdiction's operating programs to control urban runoff and any pollution that may cause into the receiving waters from stormwater. These regulations have been around for about 20 years and have essentially been the same for about the last 20 years. This new stormwater program and permit issued by the regional board is adopting a new approach to manage stormwater management and stormwater management programs in the San Diego region. And this approach is really focusing the framework of these plans on a watershed. This is away from the previous stormwater programs, which were based more jurisdictionally in what each jurisdiction was required to do, and it's really changing the performance of implementing these stormwater management programs from a checklist of activity-based programs that if you implement these, you're in compliance, to more of an outcome performance where you have to identify goals and a schedule to implement certain goals within your plan, and your outcome is what you're going to be held accountable towards. This is a brand new approach in this region, and because all the agencies have been doing the same thing for the last 20 years, there's a reluctance to change. I mean, one might say that it's been 20 years. It's time to adapt their approach for which we've been managing stormwaters. The other side of the coin says, well, we've been doing it for 20 years the same way. Why don't we just keep doing the same way? It seems to be not making things any worse. Regardless, there's a new stormwater permit that's out, and as your stormwater planning expert here, we're developing the new water quality improvement plans. It's a brand new requirement which sets the framework for implementing stormwater management programs on a watershed. In addition to these water quality improvement plans, the new stormwater permit also requires the development of a B&P design manual for development projects. This will update our existing SUSUMP ordinance. This is the requirements that development projects have to implement if they want to build in San Diego region. In addition, there's enhanced monitoring requirements. This is probably not too much of a shocker because each iteration of the permit, and this is the 5th iteration of a stormwater permit by the regional board, enhances the monitoring requirements just a little bit each time. This permit renewal was consistent in that approach, so we have additional monitoring that we're doing. Another requirement is it implements a new concept called a watershed management area analysis, and it's an option for alternative compliance for new development projects coming into the region, where developers can pay a mitigation fee instead of being held to the strict stormwater B&P design criteria required in this new stormwater permit. In this permit, it's an optional approach that the larger agencies are implementing, and most likely in the future, if it proves successful, then every agency in the region will be required to implement such an approach. And finally, this new stormwater permit also calls out a robust public participation component, more so than any other projects. So the development of these plans involves public workshops, consultation panels, and a series of meetings to develop these plans. So since last May 2013, the watershed's been working to develop these water quality improvement plans. In Imperial Beach, we are the lead agency in developing the Tijuana River Water Quality Improvement Plan, and we're also a responsible agency participating in the development in the San Diego Bay Water Quality Improvement Plan. And the regional board laid out these requirements of these plans in a phased approach. There's actually 3 deliverable phases that we have to deliver to the regional water quality control board. The first deliverable was already delivered, and we submitted ours for San Diego Bay and Tijuana River in May of this year, just a couple months ago, and it just recently completed its 30-day public commenting period. This first deliverable identified the priority water quality conditions in the watersheds. Conditions could essentially just mean pollutants that are of concern, the sources and stressors of those conditions, and a comprehensive list of potential water quality strategies to address any potential condition in the watershed. And about the 200-page document it takes for identifying all these, the take-home message is that we're required to identify the highest priority pollutant that we're going to address activities around in our watershed. And in the Tijuana River watershed, we identified sediment. It's sediment, turbidity, and siltation in the wet weather in the Tijuana River Valley that we're focusing management actions on, that all the agencies that are contributing to that section of the watershed are going to have a focused attention towards addressing. In the San Diego Bay watershed, we actually have 2 sub-watershed basins in our city. The one that discharges to the beach, we're going to focus on bacteria, and the one that discharges to San Diego Bay, the focus is going to be on trash. So we're currently working on writing up and completing the second deliverable, which is due around November, December time period to the regional board. And this is taking your highest priority conditions, which we identified in the first step, and then now developing strategies on how to address those conditions, numeric goals, and interim goals, and final goals of how these strategies are going to meet some in compliance point, and then a schedule for which we're going to ultimately meet these water quality conditions that we're trying to meet. So for Imperial Beach, what are some of the potential strategies that are being discussed? What are the additional things that we're being asked to do in these plans? And some of the discussion points that we're currently having, and which we'll be having with in public workshops and in a consultation panel and with the regional board, is we're looking at enhanced reporting of existing activities. We actually do a lot in Imperial Beach that we don't necessarily report on yet. So if we just take the work that we're doing and we put a little more effort towards the administrative side of it, then we can actually take additional credit and get credit for this new permit. We're going to potentially evaluate existing street sweeping program. Street sweeping has been demonstrated to be successful all throughout the state for reducing types of pollutants. Sediment and trash are just a couple of them. So by reviewing our street sweeping program, and we'll see if there's any opportunities or even community support for modifying and enhancing our street sweeping program. We're going to identify suitable locations for additional trash capture systems in our storm drain systems. Trash is an identified issue, but the nature of Imperial Beach 2 is that we're a rather flat city, and anything that you put in front of the catch basin could potentially cause flooding. So it takes a considerable amount of evaluation of where you're going to enhance existing BMPs if you're going to put them on your flood management infrastructure. Another possible option is enhanced enforcement of poorly maintained properties that may be generating trash or sediment. For the Tijuana River, we would definitely be calling out continued participation in existing regional partnerships. There's a number of regional partnerships going on in that watershed to address the greater binational component of the pollutants entering that watershed. And then finally, look to maybe develop a plan of how to improve unimproved roadways in this area. One could potentially be even the alleyways that we have in our city. So if we do move forward with the plan, we'll be sure to get stormwater credit for it as well. And the third and final deliverable, which is due in June 2015 time period, is a complete draft of the water quality improvement plan. This includes incorporating the changes from the first two drafts, from comments received from the public and from the regional board. It includes an additional monitoring and assessment program that is specific for the water quality improvement plan. It also includes a watershed management area analysis, which I briefly touched on. Even though only some agencies are moving forward, all the WQIPs are required to include a watershed management area analysis component to them. And a standard iterative adaptive management approach. A lot of these type of programs just need to have a plan of, well, how are you going to update the plan? And that's kind of what that chapter covers. In addition to the complete WQIP, we will also be submitting at that time an update to our jurisdictional runoff management program. That is the program that guides our own jurisdictional activities. Within that jurisdictional program also includes the updated BMP design manual that we're currently working on. That's going to require an update to your municipal code. Our municipal code will be updated probably with the other components of the new stormwater permit at that time as well. And once we submit it in June, there's a 30-day public comment period, and then we get 60 days to implement any changes that the regional board tells us that we need to implement in our plan before it becomes final. So I wanted to throw this slide on here too, just to highlight our existing cost share and MOU agreements that we have that are in place that are getting us through this fiscal year. The development of the San Diego Bay Water Quality Improvement Plan has cost a considerable amount. I mean, it's a significant amount of effort with a lot of responsible agencies and a team of consultants working on it. A similar plan, which we're the lead on, is also doing one for Tijuana River. In addition to that, we're updating the BMP design manual, which will be incorporated into our municipal code. The County of San Diego is taking the lead on that one, but we're all cost sharing the development of this plan in the region. Similarly, the watershed management and area analysis is being led by the county. And at this time, there's a regional monitoring program. And I really wanted to highlight these because monitoring is the most expensive component that's in these stormwater programs, or one of the most expensive components. I mean, we're doing, in the last 2 fiscal years, $6 million worth of monitoring in the region. And this regional monitoring, which has always been led by the county, is now being shifted down towards the watershed level. So there's a lot of challenges that lay ahead that haven't quite been worked out. So what are the next steps that we get to look forward to? Well, the final WQIPs become the law of the land here or sometime around August 2015, depending on the comments that the regional board gives us back in June. And up until that point, we're actually currently working on our MOU and cost share agreements with each of the watersheds and with the regional programs to really try to figure out, well, what elements of the stormwater permit are going to stay at the regional level, which ones are going to be kicked back down to the watershed level. There's a number of important decisions that still need to be made. And that actually highlights a number of challenges that we're looking to face in this program. Because the watershed programs are really being focused on a watershed level, it's presenting a new way that agencies are required to implement, report, and assess stormwater management programs. And it presents different challenges for different agencies. The regional stormwater permit is a one-size-fits-all approach to managing stormwater, where the permit calls out a bunch of new stormwater management activities that may be easier for smaller agencies like ours to implement because we don't have huge numbers of staff. But for cities and county and large agencies, it's hard moving a ship that's going full steam in one direction and then implementing new programs or modifying a program. Similarly, the new permit calls out enhanced reporting and assessment requirements. So it's essentially administrative work, the paper pushing. We have the same amount of paper pushing on a small jurisdiction as the county does as a large jurisdiction. So the amount of paper pushing we do on a smaller agency is more burdensome on our level of effort. But implementing programmatic changes is not as difficult. So there's changes and challenges that are currently being worked through. And a couple of reality checks probably being made at the regional board at this time with such a substantial shift in this new stormwater program. And while we're still working on implementing this existing permit, we're constantly looking towards the future of what's coming down the line. And there's a couple of important changes that we know that are coming. One is the watershed management area analysis, the alternative compliance program for development projects in the region. It's an optional component in this new stormwater permit, but there's a substantial amount of interest within the regional board level and also from developers to have an option to pay into just a mitigation fee to not have to worry about stormwater on their projects. And the regional board's excited about having a new additional funding source to fund restoration projects. So there's this interest coming forward that if it proves down, then it will eventually need to be moved down into the smaller agencies, which would increase the administration of implementing such a program in our jurisdiction. And then on another issue is this last couple weeks, actually a couple weeks ago, the state of California State Water Board issued a statewide trash policy, which will require every jurisdiction in the state of California to implement the same trash management program, which essentially calls out the requirement to capture all of the trash coming off from jurisdictions over a 10-year period. The final statewide trash policy will likely be issued in the next year, and depending when it finally comes out, it will be updated into our new stormwater permit whenever it gets reopened again. And there's a reopener for our existing permit in 2015 when Orange County comes in, wrapped into this permit, and also in 2016 when Riverside comes in to the existing stormwater permit. So it's at one of those two times, we're also going to have a new requirement to address trash and have another plan have to be developed. So with that, I'll open up for questions if you have on any of this water quality improvement plans or stormwater management programs. So it's up to you.
Thank you, Mr. Helmers. I just have a few questions on your report. Maybe you can shed some light on some of them. Updating the BMPs. What changes will that mean to residential development and to our business community? Is it going to be more onerous on them? Is it, and how's that going to be presented to them?
The onerous BMPs that actually require some substantial cost increase over them will be applied to priority development projects. And right now, the priority development projects are the ones that are about 1 acre in size. We have a few, or 1 acre size, depending, and it also depends on the number of parking spaces put in, depending on the type of development. So the projects that would be impacted is larger developments, hotel constructions, larger restaurants being put in. They'll be required to be held to a BMP design standard that needs to be certified by an engineer.
What about existing businesses?
Existing businesses will be exempt until they decide to remodel their facility.
Okay, until remodel. Okay. You talked about the street sweeping program and maybe reevaluating that. Are we not happy with our street sweeping, or do we think that we could enhance that? And who would pay for that?
Well, we have an existing street sweeping program right now that's written into our EDCO contract. And I think the first step would be to sit down with our EDCO contract and the contractor and review, is our frequency of sweeping adequate? It's quite likely it probably is adequate. And if we were comfortable with the frequency at which we're sweeping our streets, for example, we're doing commercial areas once a week, regular residential areas once a month, and then high traffic areas every other week right now. And if that frequency is sufficient, then maybe the issue is not getting the cars off of the street in certain areas that are high trash generating. And then that raises up another question of, well, is that community, in that section of the community, supportive of implementing no parking signs in that area of town if you're going to have cleaner streets? And that's where just evaluating the street sweeping program is a substantial undertaking, which requires public workshops, community engagement, at least a couple of city council visits to discuss it before we even make a decision on it. But in this plan, I'm willing to commit to at least evaluating the option and seeing if there is support for such a thing in the community. Because in stormwater, there's only one interest that needs to be met within this community. And if we're doing our due diligence, at least demonstrating that we're evaluating, and it's one of the factors that we're looking at, then I would hope the regional board is amenable to it.
But there are some individual proactive activities that homeowners and businesses could be undertaking to improve that situation.
Education outreach is still an important component and one that we can take credit for.
Yeah,
correct.
It is. I remember when we had to initiate our JRUMP and how involved that was and how long it took to write that document and to get it right. And you talked about some challenges, talked about a new way of reporting and implementing, and I want to know, what do you think that could potentially mean for us financially, because we are already spending a substantial amount of money in administering that JRUMP. Do you see those costs increasing?
My concern, the cost issue has not necessarily been figured out, but my concerns for cost is bringing down the monitoring programs to a watershed level and not at a regional level. You'll obviously lose some economies of scale by bringing down things to a watershed instead of all 9 watersheds in San Diego County implementing one program. You're going to have 9 different contracts going on at once. So there would be additional costs under those scenarios. It hasn't been fully vetted or evaluated or decisions even been made yet among all the co-permittees. I mean, we're just one of 21 votes of the San Diego co-permittees on the direction that we're going on this. The regional board has made their voice clear that we want to see monitoring go down to the watershed level. That's the most effective way to manage it. And it's possible that it might go that direction. And if it does go that direction, monitoring and reporting on a watershed level, then I imagine there would be some increased costs.
I was afraid you were going to say that. But it's kind of a nice segue into my next and last question. You talked about the mitigation bank that a developer would pay into. And I'm wondering, is that going to be effective? And so these fees are going to go into this mitigation bank. Is that actually going to funnel down into the city of Imperial Beach? And how are those funds going to be divvied up? And is it really going to be effective? I mean, they can just pay into that and maybe ignore some BMPs, which is very concerning to me.
So we're asking the exact same questions you are.
Okay.
There's no answers yet.
No answers yet?
Yeah.
I'm sure you'll keep us apprised of when some of those answers are forthcoming.
I mean, those are the concerns that we have, is like, well, we're going to have our development paying into a project outside of our jurisdiction. That's unacceptable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Helmers.
We have any other questions for Ms. Helmer?
Just one, and thank you for all those good questions, because I don't have to ask hardly any because of all your good questions. The street sweeping, maybe this has been thought of already, but you can't predict when the rains are going to come, but the rains and the runoff are the issue. And it would seem to make sense then to concentrate more street sweeping around the seasonal or prior to the rainy season. Is that something that could save us some money so we don't sweep just to be sweeping? And maybe in those situations, residents could be convinced to move their cars because it's going to have an impact and it's not going to be the whole year round. I mean, it all depends on where you live. I lived in New York City when I was in grad school, and I had to move my car every other day. You know, and that's just, you grumbled about it, but you did it. And here, you know, once or twice a year, maybe people could tolerate it. I don't know if they're for good cause. Just a thought.
Good idea.
I don't see any other questions for you, Chris. Thank you very much. Be very, very careful of this street sweeping and parking. Don't get caught. I notice Mr. Clark's not here. Don't get caught in his game here. All right. Moving on to item 5.5. Mr. Wade?
Thank you, Mayor and members of the council. This is the third city council update for the, I hope I'm on the right item, Palm Avenue Commercial and Mixed Use Corridor Master Plan. As you may recall, the last update was given at your meeting on May 21st. There's been a little bit of a lull the last 2 months in terms of giving you the update, and what I'd like to do is give you an update on the outreach that continued as you were last being updated, an update on Caltrans coordination, and an update on the transportation system analysis evaluation, which this council authorized Caltrans to proceed with as the initial start of studying and analyzing a potential relinquishment. And then an update on SANDAG coordination as a result of our Caltrans coordination and recommendations for the council. I'll try to do all of these things very briefly. The good news is during the outreach, which included presentations to the City Council, Design Review Board, Chamber of Commerce, Business Improvement District, the Kiwanis Club, as well as receiving input on the city's dedicated web page for this project, the general support for the project is high. There's quite a bit of support. In fact, I would characterize it as majority support for the project as designed and proposed. Of course, there are concerns that have been expressed, even by those in support of the project, and not surprisingly, they are pertaining to potential traffic impacts, as well as costs for implementation. So those aren't unexpected, and we'll be able to address them as the project proceeds. During the project and on April 12th, we talked about it's always been anticipated that relinquishment might be a consideration for implementation of some of the more ambitious parts of the project. We provided a set of plans to Caltrans in early April. We reported to you in May that they gave us comments at the end of April, and then during coordination with them subsequent to our meeting, we received official notification near the end of June that in fact several of the items proposed in the plan would conflict with the design manual for the state highways and would not even be eligible for what they call design exceptions through the Caltrans review process. So what that means is that in order to implement those, we'd likely be looking at either a partial relinquishment or a relinquishment of the right-of-way so that the city would have jurisdiction of that roadway and the ability to implement these elements of the plan. I've highlighted what those elements were, but they pertain particularly to the local access lane, the local access medians not being able to have or requiring a shoulder on each side of those, which would preclude that. The requirements for the design speed not allowing at 45 miles an hour on some segments recently upgraded, to 45 miles an hour lane widths that we were proposing to incorporate traffic calming and safety and bicycle paths, as well as not allowing curb bulb outs for intersections and enhancing the crosswalks for pedestrian safety. So those are some of the things that would be in conflict with the design manual. With that information, and because of that information that was finally given to us on June, I believe 23rd, and making the determination after evaluating that, we asked about the transportation system analysis evaluation and where we were with that. We'd initially been hoping for that sometime in April or May. It was given to us beginning of July. And that report really stopped short of giving us a lot of information. You may recall this council and members of the council asked for, obviously, in order to make that decision, staff and the council need a lot more information. Effectively, that report and evaluation, which was attached to your staff report, basically said that we've evaluated the right-of-way and it's suitable and appropriate for relinquishment, potential relinquishment. In fact, it goes so far as to say that the entire route of State Route 75 is desirable for relinquishment from the state to various jurisdictions. What it doesn't do is it doesn't, excuse me, go into the next step of really, excuse me, evaluating the roadway for needed improvements. That would come in the next phase, which is also a no-cost, no-commitment phase called a project scope summary report, which is the subject of one of the recommendations at the end of the staff report. The other issue is SANDAG coordination. Because of this information, as you know, this project's being funded primarily by a grant from Caltrans, or sorry, SANDAG, the Smart Growth Incentive Grant Program. And because they're the grant administrator, and because the project as proposed was the project that was awarded the grant money based on the merits of that project and what it was intended to do, calm traffic, create a main street, make pedestrian safety improvements, make bicycle safety improvements, really create a main street for our community that would foster commercial development, retail development, as well as make a more safe roadway for all modes of transportation. They encouraged us to proceed with this plan as proposed, draft the environmental document and assess the project as proposed. That would have to acknowledge that some elements of the plan would require a relinquishment in order to implement, and have that plan ready for approved and ready to go if in fact that ever happened. Now SANDAG is not suggesting to the council we want you to consider a relinquishment. What they're saying is this is the project that we funded and provided grant funds for. And this is a project we want you to continue to plan and design for, and maybe in the future, if the planets align, the project can proceed, and that's what we want you to do. So that's SANDAG's input. We received we met with them last week. We met all the way up to the director head of their department, and received an email the next day reinforcing that desire to have us proceed. Based on that recommendation, and also considering the fact that this PSSR, which it's staff's recommendation to request of Caltrans that they proceed with that, again being a no-cost, no-commitment review, that could take up to a year to complete. Our schedule for the grant would be completely compromised by waiting for that to take place before we were able to make an educated decision as a staff and a council as to what relinquishment acceptance of that might mean for the city. That was one of the contributing factors to SANDAG suggesting and asking us to proceed, and one of the major contributor in staff supporting that recommendation and asking the city council to direct us to proceed with the project as proposed and as designed. The PSSR, again, will go into that very detailed phase of evaluating the roadway for improvements necessary to bring it into a satisfactory condition. And one of the options, this is where negotiation comes into play, is what's called a financial contribution only option, which means they assess the improvements, they identify what it costs to those improvements, and they essentially pay the city that amount to take the roadway. And that's a negotiated amount, by the way. And other jurisdictions that have proceeded with the PSSR have asked for things such as ongoing operations and maintenance costs for periods of up to 10 years. So that's not beyond the realm of possibility, but it's something that we may be looking at in the future. The concern is we just don't have time to wait for that report, and this is a project that, as I said, has quite a bit of community support. It's had support from this council as well as others in the past during the first phase of the project, and we think it's important enough to proceed. And there are elements of this plan that could be implemented even with a Caltrans controlled right-of-way. The other thing I'd like to point out, and in the presentation in the staff report, is that today the city already pays the lion's share of maintenance in that roadway, close to $100,000 per year, where Caltrans' estimate is they pay about $35,000 a year over a 4-year period. So while that only considers and includes maintenance, that doesn't include capital costs. Should also point out that we're currently funding a capital project in State Route 75 to repair our sewer, and that's because we control the sewer. But other capital costs such as storm drains, road surfacing, hardscape improvements, those are the things that a PSSR will analyze and hopefully give this council a clearer picture on what might, or a future council, what might be needed in terms of relinquishment. So staff's recommendation, that's a lot of information to absorb, but despite the fact that there are some challenges and some conflicts with the plan as presented with the State Highway Manual, our recommendation is that we've come this far, and with the support of SANDAG, we'd like to recommend that the council support us moving forward with the project, preparing the environmental document, and also authorizing issuance of a letter to Caltrans to take it into the next phase of the PSSR. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Patton?
So, Mr. Wade, first of all, I'm not opposed to the Main Street idea, and you know, I went to the meetings, and that looked okay. There's just a lot of unknowns that are popping up, and which are send red flags for me. So, if we did take over Palm Avenue, does that mean we control the speed? We get to make that decision of the speed?
With speed studies, yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we're back to square one. If speed study says 45 miles an hour, then we have to keep it at 45 miles
And
an hour.
I'd have to defer to a traffic engineer, but my guess is in order to change speed limits, you'd need a speed study to do that, to make it enforceable.
Okay, and like enforceable, right?
Right. You could change speeds.
Yeah, I understand that. And then if there was a catastrophic event on Palm Avenue, say a giant sinkhole or these major things that, you know, you don't have a crystal ball, but we'd be responsible for that, correct? If we did take over the 75?
Well, I'm going to sound like an attorney and say the answer is it depends. For example, that catastrophic water main break in Los Angeles is the responsibility of the water district. So if we had a water main break in State Highway, I don't believe that the city would be responsible for that. However, if there was a capital improvement, the roadway failed or a storm drain collapsed, then yes, potentially the city would be responsible for that.
So I'm just kind of going down my list here, bear with me. Now with the new Navy coastal campus that's in the works, he stated there's going to be 5,000 people a day coming to that coastal campus, and I don't know if they're coming over the bridge or if they're coming down Palm Avenue, and if there's been any surveys done. Number one, and we already have Saturn down there at the end of Palm Avenue, which is not getting any better, and I just would hate to have two major things on Palm Avenue that's not working. And what's to say in the future that the Navy doesn't decide to make their campus larger and say, okay, we're going to make it 10,000 people a day, we're going to make it 15,000 people a day. 30 years from now, we don't know that. And if we're down to 2 lanes, that could be problematic. And I guess what I'm trying to get at is if there's any way we could do like a trial, blocking off a lane and see what it looks like with 2 lanes, or restripe it temporarily and just kind of before we just jump in, just kind of see what it looks like that way. Because I know the lights right now, I was on Palm Avenue the other in the morning, and cars were almost queued up in 3 lanes all the way from 7th to Florida. That's 3 lanes, and the lights are extremely long, going both ways. And if we shorten the lights going north and south, and lengthen the lights going east and west, that could cure some of the problem there. I guess the bottom line is, when this is all said and done, my name's going to be on this, and your name's going to be on this, and I just want to make sure it's done right. And with all these red flags popping up, it's just kind of concerning to me, and I just wanted to throw out those options.
And I appreciate those comments. I want to make it clear that although it appears that way, there's no proposal to reduce the middle part to 2 lanes. The highway effectively becomes 2 lanes. There will always be 6 lanes in the center of the roadway. There are already just 2 lanes in each direction west of 7th. And that would remain. So we're not reducing the number of lanes. We are altering the way those 3 lanes move in each direction from 9th to Florida. That's proposed anyway. And it's a 2-block area. Part of the program, part of the funded analyses in the traffic impact analysis will be a visual simulation model that will visually show you in a video what the traffic will look like. So we can do even better rather than put it in the roadway, which, by the way, Caltrans wouldn't allow us to do unless we owned the roadway. Is a model, a visual model that can, in peak hours. Now, you may say, okay, that's that we're just seeing something that's conceptual, but it'll show you what can happen during peak hours. We can throw in additional traffic into that model. For example, the anticipated Navy traffic to the Coastal Campus project. If we ever got to a point of a relinquished roadway and we wanted to study it, that's an excellent idea. Is to just use a soft solution in terms of a study to see how that functions, see what kind of impacts it creates. We can certainly put that into an implementation strategy, but even before we get there, our hope is we can show everybody what the potential might be, and it could be that it's with the additional traffic of other projects, a challenge at best. So. These are questions that we knew coming in, even with this proposal, would be a challenge from a traffic standpoint, and every comment is well taken, and that's why part of the scope is this model, this visual model to analyze it. And I've seen them pretty effectively show what can and can't happen from a traffic standpoint. The Coastal Campus project is the timing is interesting, and it's going to be needed to be analyzed even without this project, what its impacts will be, and staff is currently digging into that right now.
Well, I realize you don't take this lightly. I've looked at your paperwork, I looked at the graphs, and I know you're doing all you can on this, but definitely I want to throw that out, because if you look at Palm Avenue, the road died on Palm Avenue, people love it, then you have those other people that opposite will love it. You kind of get both. So, and that's not affecting as many people as it would on Highway 75. So, we have to get this right. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm really torn on this project. On one hand, the vision of the project is really beautiful and what we need. And I can see the need and the desire to proceed with the full implementation of the planning grant, the $400,000 planning grant, and as long as we don't know yet that relinquishment would not be feasible. In other words, if we knew right now that we could not afford relinquishment, or that there were other conditions that would make the original concept literally impossible, and it would have to be changed to such a degree that we wouldn't achieve those benefits, the side roadways, the more the whole environment more conducive to a Main Street neighborhood, business and pedestrian-friendly corridor, etc. If we knew more information now that where we knew this just wasn't going to happen, no matter whether we go through this design or not, we probably wouldn't do it because we've got $50,000 of matching funds, cash, and $45,000 of in-kind, your time, staff time, that would be building this bridge to nowhere if it's really nowhere. Now, when I look at when I hear my colleagues' comments about the campus, it makes me a little concerned. When I think about the fact that San Diego, Caltrans owns the rest of it to the east, and San Diego may have other ideas if they get relinquishment of that portion that may or may not be compatible. That's further down the road. And then the comment in the Caltrans report at the bottom of page 6 that talks about another issue that would have to be considered in terms of how a potential relinquishment would impact neighboring cities and the naval station. Specifically, military equipment and hazardous material that cannot go across the bridge. Okay, so that's what I'm getting at in terms of whether this original vision is feasible. If they're going to have military vehicles that require wide lanes, continue to be able to use Route 75, does that impact what we will ultimately be able to do? They're talking about an MOU that Caltrans would still have to approve, you know, that takes these things into consideration. So I guess what I think we need to do is really look at all of the constraints that are going to make the original concept, even with relinquishment, not achievable. See what's left if we still comply with the throughput and other kinds of requirements that are just going to be there, including with the Navy's campus and the heavy equipment issues and the hazmat issues and all that. If we take a look at what's left, is it worth it? That's really the question. Is it worth our 50 grand? Really, literally 100 grand of city investment? Is it worth the grant? Is it worth the opportunity cost of your time and the time of other staffs, etc. If we can never really get there? So I'm sorry to take a lot of time, but I think it's really the same point.
I'm going to step in, and I know Greg can probably help me a lot more. There's a lot going on this thing, and as you know, I'm your Sandag representative. And because of this issue with Caltrans, and it's a Sandag grant, beyond what Greg meaning with that, I'd requested, and they're setting up a meeting with the Caltrans director for District 11 and the executive director of Sandag, because it concerns me of going forward on something that we're designing for a bookshelf. And Sandag's interest is because it's their grant money, and Caltrans, you know, is a player. I mean, because they do have a manual that actually says this is the way we're supposed to be moving forward with main streets. But that's a different section of Caltrans that responded to this, and that's where we have to go to the district director level, or for that matter, the transportation secretary up in Sacramento. But that being said, I think that what we're really at here is the design part and trying to move forward. The relinquishment idea, or whatever it is to see if it's possible. And what's even scarier, and I know my friends in Coronado are scared of this as too, is, you know, the governor, who is most likely going to be governor again next year, is the one that got rid of redevelopment. The next thing on the chopping block is local state highways. And the rumors are flying around Sacramento right now that is one of the things to save money in that transportation budget that he has up there, is not to ask us if we want it, is to basically say, you got it. So, I mean, I understand these are a lot of moving things, and maybe Greg can help me on timing here. If you move forward, when would you complete what we're doing right now?
excuse me, our contract with our lead consultant has a scope that goes to completion of the project, certify the environmental document by January, February of next year, and that's a 12-month schedule, and our grant window is 18 months. If we get pressing up against 18 months, we'll likely have to go to Sandag and request an extension, which would require regional planning committee approval and those kinds of things. So that's our current schedule for this project.
That's the status. And then I'm going to jump
By the
in
way,
on
I'm sorry. We have been delayed, though, about 2 months waiting for the transportation system analysis and the Caltrans final opinion about design exceptions so that could be pushed out to about March or April.
So part of your thing is a restudy of the actual traffic management on this thing. I mean, I know we looked at it in the original draft, what we came forward with before, but you're doing more in-depth studies on traffic with what you're doing right now. Is that correct?
That's correct.
How does this coastal campus fit into that?
We've been having conversations today. We just got the thing hit the streets, about a week ago, last week, and there are some concerns. Our project, the initial analysis, showed actually an improvement in levels of service at the major intersections, Rainbow and I think it was 13th, and build out scenarios as opposed to existing conditions. But with this project, we just need to be clear. I mean, there's a statement in their executive summary that says that they've coordinated with Sandag, and Sandag's incorporated these projects, including the coastal campus, into their traffic models.
That's why part of my position in meeting with the Sandag and Caltrans.
Right.
They did what? How come we didn't know much about this idea?
Exactly.
Because in that same report, it basically says, well, we know there's a problem at Palm and Saturn, and maybe they'll have to fix it in 2040. I could have swore this is 2014. We already have the problem. I don't know what it'll look like in 2040. So there's a lot of moving stuff here, but if we're going back to what you're asking us for this evening, is basically to try to move forward with the original grant, keep going, and then ask Caltrans to take that next step of studying the capital costs and everything to do with the road.
That's correct.
I'm more concerned about this EIS that's out on the coastal campus and the interface it has, not just if we were doing this project, but on Highway 75 Palm Avenue, whether the Imperial Beach ends up inheriting it.
And that's, yeah.
I want that information and that response to come back to this city council before it goes to the Department of the Navy. And I am personally going to find out what Sandag studied there, because they sure forgot to tell me about it. I could have swore I represented Imperial Beach down there.
And what I'd like to say about that is that EIS comment period is September 22nd to have our comments into the Navy.
I would like to also have the possibility that we're asking for an extension on that EIS, because they've done that for us before.
That's correct.
If we don't have time, I don't want to rush. That thing is huge as far as what it does for traffic. I mean, could be other benefits to our community, but all these things come together, and I think we should be moving forward in what we got the grant for, but we've got a lot of other things to bring into the picture here that could have an effect on it. I mean, for somebody to tell me that you can bring X amount of people through Imperial Beach with no effects on a road we already do, and I still question whether Caltrans screwed with our lighting on that road just so that we'd ask for relinquishment, because it sure looks like the lights have changed a lot lately to me. But they've got to fix it. Palm and Saturn is screwed up. That's the city of San Diego. San Diego got almost the same grant that we got the first stage of Palm Avenue. They just received it. Councilmember Alvarez said that they're going out, I believe, for bid on whoever they're going to have for a consultant on that thing coming up in the next couple months. So, I mean, things are moving to make Palm Avenue better, but we've got to look at all the other things moving around with it. So,
I'm sorry.
You guys mind if I interrupt just for a second? We're talking about the Navy, but we're also forgetting that there's a large development going in at Marion High School that we really need to take a look at too, because if I remember right, it's 200-something units going into that property, which will impact traffic on Palm Avenue as well. When we have a discussion about the Navy, we definitely need to have a discussion on that as well.
So Mr. Mayor, you've squarely raised the question of the timing of the Sandag grant. And there are so many factors that are becoming visible that may not have been adequately factored in when the original vision that resulted in getting the grant that we're still trying to build around, went forward. And my basic point is all these different factors, including San Diego's timing and the obvious need for us to be on the same page with San Diego on the corridor, if there's gonna be a relinquishment. The original idea was great, but it's been overtaken by events. And when something gets overtaken by events, you don't keep doing the same thing you were doing. You know what that's the definition of. So, to me, we really need to consider getting Sandag to say, okay, you got the money. Let's extend this time period so that you can get into phase with these other developments, get a better understanding of what their impacts are going to be, have some coordination with San Diego. Sandag could facilitate that, and let's make sure that this corridor gets designed as an integrated corridor instead of our little wonderful piece of it, and it's not going to be feasible, and then San Diego comes along and wants to do something else.
Mr. Spriggs, I apologize. Councilmember Alvarez is included in that meeting. I mean, San Diego is included on the meeting with Sandag and Caltrans on the whole road. All right. I mean, just so you know, we didn't leave San Diego out.
No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that their portion, their grant to do the study that will elicit from their constituencies what their vision is for their portion of Route 75 needs to be in sync with what we're doing, and we don't know that that's the case yet. There's still a lot of work there. We're a year or two ahead of them.
I can be totally honest with you. When City of San Diego got their grant, they were given our information to apply for the grant. They basically used Mr. Wade's and Mr. Nick, all the information we actually helped feed them so that they could qualify for a grant. Their goal was to move along the same direction. Now, true, this EIS on this Navy campus changes things, but I'm still a little disappointed with San Diego not talking about how they can bring a Walmart in that never affected traffic at Saturn and Palm. But we lost that battle. It was built before I realized it. But I see where you're going, but I think maybe the idea of just getting a little more time, because like Mr. Wade said, we have an 18-month grant. To get the extension, to be totally honest with you, is not that difficult. I don't know how much longer it would be, but I mean, to get an extension is not something I've seen this happen on several projects that Sandag has funded for different reasons, and not even maybe as justified as our reasons could be. It's just that, I think that we need to keep looking at it. I know that Mr. Wade was trying to see if they would let us tweak a little bit of what we were doing due to new circumstances, but the grant was given. We competed to get that money with the project that's on the table. We can't sit there and say, well, things have changed, so can you give us the money and we're going to do something else with it. It's for the project that we've seen in the past. It's not for a project on Palm Avenue. It's for that project. But I think we should try to move forward with this, but there's a lot of moving things. I'm more concerned personally because whether we go through the next stage, we still haven't got any capital money to build this project anyway, is to figure out what the Navy's up to with the coastal campus, because it not only affects Palm Avenue, it affects other parts of our city too. And I think we really need to get in front of that one, because I was very, very disappointed in what was in that report about, they've already studied it, but they don't need to mitigate for it for another 30 years. I don't know what we're going to do for 30 years watching all those people drive down the street. So,
if I may, what we can do and what is going to have to be done, given this the coastal campus EIS that's on the street, we can't ignore the fact that project is moving forward at least with this stage. So what I think we're going to have to do is, even if we proceed with the project as currently designed, we are going to have to evaluate, as Councilmember Spriggs and others have alluded to, what what impacts may dictate in terms of that potential operation. And if even without relinquishment, we can't handle that traffic, we're going to have to assess that. So even though our budget is tight on this grant, I think we would have to evaluate an alternative solution that would effectuate our goals, but also allow for traffic circulation that would be suitable for now and in the future. And that actually might require putting some additional budget into it, but at least we'd have a project that has a backup plan. So I think we can come forward with that as we figure out what the traffic analyses say in the EIS, whether we agree with those, and whether the project we've got is going to conflict horribly with that. I think we can come back and do that. But part of what I'd like to do is continue on with that design process, have Caltrans continue on assessing the right-of-way. And by the way, we have coordinated with the Navy, we have advised them of the project, and we have specifically asked them about their large vehicles, their transport requirements, their vehicle width requirements, and at no point have they ever said, this plan doesn't work for us. Now, that may change with the Coastal Campus project, because that project was, although planned, wasn't a project. So that coordination is still going to continue, and so it's not as if we've been doing this without the Navy's input. We've had Navy input in the first part of the plan, and we've had Navy input with this phase of the plan as well. So we'll continue to do that. So if that helps, I think we'd be unwise to continue on, even if the council directs us to do so, and not have an alternative based on what the traffic impacts are going to dictate. Because if they say you can't do the local access lane and have a consistent flow of traffic, we'd be unwise to pursue it, even if it was part of the plan.
So, Mr. Wade, from this evening, you're asking us to move forward with continue on the plan that we started with many years ago, and also continue to act with Caltrans for them to study it at no cost and no commitment to us.
Correct.
Okay.
And my extra, I guess, suggestion and assurance of the council would be that we'd also study, depending upon the impacts, the cumulative impacts of the Navy project, our project. Let's not forget, there's also a project proposed for Bernardo Shores. All these cumulative impacts.
Project that Mr. Bilbray mentioned, I mean, all those things.
The Marion High School, absolutely. So take those into consideration and say, okay, as we're moving along with this design, what is a possible backup plan that doesn't affect the roadway or the traffic in now and into the future with those projects coming online? My guess is it's a much easier design to come up with. It's not the ambitious kind of design we're currently working on, and so for that reason, it may take some engineering, but it won't, from a concept standpoint, it won't take a lot to develop. That's my guess. But it also won't achieve all the same objectives that we were hoping to achieve.
Thank you. Mr. Wade, when you first started addressing us, you used the phrase, we've come this far. And that's how I feel about this project, is we have come this far. I would hate to abandon it. And we've been the victims of progress, not just in our own city, but certainly in San Diego with the Walmart that the mayor mentioned. I think it's necessary, to proceed with the project scope summary. We're in the car and we're driving down the road and we have a destination. That was our master plan. But as we're going along down the road in our car, we're going to have to start collecting more things for this road trip. So that's one of the things that we need to collect. Anything that if we don't arm ourselves with information, it's going to be disastrous. So I would like to proceed with, I would like to follow the mayor's recommendation. I think we've started this. I don't want to give up on it. But there's a lot more pieces to this puzzle than when we first sat down how many years ago and started with this project. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing up the idea of a backup plan. And that backup plan you could almost have a plan C. It could be a hybrid of of everything. So I think looking at options is kind of where we're at right now, and a Main Street idea where shops and people could slow down and go shopping in Imperial Beach would be a nice thing. We just, like I said, doing it right and have different plans. Perfect idea.
Is that enough direction for you, Mr. Wade, to go forward? But we got to push these other buttons on the military and Sandag and Caltrans. I think that there's some agencies there that we really need to get out in front of.
If it helps, or for staff, it would help if we could have a motion and a direction from staff to proceed with the recommendation, with the caveat that we're also going to be looking at potential alternatives to the plan.
I'd make that motion. A motion and a second. Any further comment? Could we please?
I'm in support of this, continuing with your I think modification of the approach to really look at Plan B, take into consideration all these elements. But I really envision a fundamental incompatibility here that's going to need to be reconciled between this being a throughfare for the benefit of the Coronado North Island types, the way it already has been, and it being a neighborhood street that Imperial Beach wants. There's a fundamental incompatibility there, and the question is there enough common ground where we can have a better street environment for Imperial Beach and still recognize the fact that this is a major thoroughfare. It's a state highway, and it's going to stay a state highway in de facto, if not legally. So I think it's a big challenge that we're facing to try to find enough common ground to be worth the money and the effort in the end. So I think it's worth a try.
So my toll road to Coronado's not going to fly then. Huh? The mayor of Coronado wasn't happy with that idea either.
Well.
So we have a motion and a second. Could we please vote?
Motion carried unanimously.
Thank you. Moving on to item 6.1. We're doing some more. Mr. Wade, you got it again.
Chair and members of the successor agency, and mayor and members of the city council. This is actually a combined item of both the council and the successor agency. And what we're looking for tonight is approval of a bond fund expenditure agreement. We're actually calling it an agreement regarding retention and expenditure of bond proceeds from our 2010 tax allocation bonds. As you may recall, we issued bonds in 2010. We assigned and allocated them and expended them on projects. And what we didn't expend on projects, we put on our first recognized obligation payment schedule and had those approved, and the monies were given to paid to the city to effectuate those projects. Two things have happened since then. One, we have a little bit of leftover bond funds from that amount. And then recently, as this council was made aware, the bond trustee was holding $1,274,000 some odd dollars. What's the number? $452 in a project fund, and they released that to us this year. And the council, in a prior action, allocated that to the alley project, subject to approval on our recognized obligation payment schedule. What this bond fund expenditure agreement will do will allocate or take those bond funds, so $1.274 million, and the unexpended bond funds in the approximate amount of $400,000, which in the staff report we identify as potentially potentially for use for a hotel project at the corner of Imperial Beach Boulevard and Seacoast Drive, or other projects as approved by the City Council, as well as we have allocated of those bond proceeds up to $1.8 million for the Bikeway Village project. We've made application for a state grant, transportation planning grant. Sorry, it's a capital project. And if successful in getting those grant funds, it could substantially reduce the amount of redevelopment bond funds we'd need for that. So we've made provisions for an amount of up to approximately 1.4 million of those bond funds to be allocated to other projects by the city under this bond expenditure agreement. It wouldn't shortcut the Bikeway Village project by any amount. It would simply replace grant money for those bond funds. What this will do is then we put this, if approved by the successor agency and by resolution and by the city council, we take it to our oversight board next week for approval, put the bond fund expenditure agreement on our next recognized obligation payment schedule, which we've already put it into the draft, and you'll be seeing that at your next meeting. And then if approved by the DOF, and we have every reason to believe they would approve it, these bond funds, by virtue of having received our finding of completion from the Department of Finance, says that finding of completion states emphatically that we can spend these bond proceeds for the purposes intended under the bond indenture, and these purposes would the purposes we've identified would satisfy that requirement, and that we'd expect the approval of the agreement sometime in December, and we'd be able to begin expending those funds at January 1 of 2015. And the thing about the agreement would be is that the city would then have the funds, and they'd have as much time as needed to expend those funds. So we're recommending approval of both resolutions supporting this expenditure agreement of bond funds.
Thank you very much. I mean, sometimes things look pretty good. Hopefully it works out for us because it's got to go through a couple more steps, doesn't it?
Yep.
Yeah. Do we have any other questions for Mr. Wade on that? Ms. Bragg?
Thank you. Mr. Wade, on page 3 of attachment 1, we specifically call out the proposed Tower 23 project.
Mm-hmm.
Say something happened and that project didn't happen. Are we okay by just saying for other projects?
Yes, we've conferred with our attorneys on that, and that's fine as long as it says for other projects as approved and in compliance with our indenture, our bond covenants.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
I had a question also on the agreement, and that's at the bottom of page 1, item C, which talks about the kinds of things the bond proceeds can be spent on.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a little bit confusing when it said financing for projects that benefit the Palm Avenue / commercial redevelopment project area, and then more specifically list some other items.
Mm-hmm.
Are those other items actually in the bond document?
They actually are. Those items are in the bond covenants, and that was put in there by after we have a meeting with underwriters and our bond counsel, and we talked about all the projects we'd be working on and the projects we expected to be working on, and those are the ones they listed, the bond counsel. We didn't read that, but the airfield, for example, airfield property improvements, that's actually Bikeway Village.
Right.
Because that was the airport-owned property.
Generically speaking.
Which doesn't make any sense, but that's what that is. Hotel project was the Seacoast Inn. Now the Pier South Hotel. Street and alley improvements is very generic. These, just by the way, by virtue of listing these, doesn't mean that this is exclusive to any other improvements. Other projects identified in the original Palm Avenue commercial redevelopment project, which is still a document, would be satisfactory to meet the objectives of the bond indenture. That's it, but that language comes right from the covenant.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Wade.
So then I'd ask for a motion to adopt a successor agency resolution, SA 1443. We have a motion and a second. Could we please vote?
Motion carried unanimously.
And then we have City Council Resolution 2014-7510. We have a motion and a second. Could we please vote?
Motion carried unanimously.
Moving on to the couple items that we pulled from consent, we'll start with item 2.3.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out that as your representative on MTS, this was not an easy agreement to achieve. This went back and forth between the City of San Diego and MTS. City of San Diego doesn't want to regulate it. They wanted MTS. MTS doesn't want to regulate it. They want the City of San Diego to do it. In between all of that are the smaller cities that I was really proud of our smaller cities. We've negotiated this contract many times, and this time all of us smaller cities really kind of banded together and had some comment on some of the content that is still coming back to MTS. But I am glad that we finally were able to come to an agreement. It wasn't easy, but I think it works best for our city. And that's really the reason why I wanted to pull that item. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, what we have before us then is Resolution 2014-7508. We have a motion and a second. Could we please vote?
Mr. Mayor, I need an oral vote.
Not a problem. Could we take an oral vote? All in favor? Aye. Any nays? Any abstentions? Thank you.
Motion carried by the following vote. Ayes, Bragg, Spriggs, Bilbray, Janney. Absent, Patton.
Moving on to item 2.6, and I'm going to ask Mr. Homer to come on up.
Mr. Mayor, if I might, I'd ask that this be pulled because it as I mentioned before, it does involve water safety testing, and whether the proposed quicker alternative is as accurate and safe as the existing system, and a little bit of explanation about it, please. Thank you.
All right, so the legislation that we're asking to support here is actually a bill sponsored by the County of San Diego, and it actually authorizes the use of a testing method that's been approved by the EPA, and this method uses molecular-based sampling. It tests for the presence or absence of molecular bacteria cells. In contrast to the existing testing method, which just is a culture-based, you take a water sample and they see what grows in it. And if so much stuff grows, then if too much of it grows, then the water is dirty. Obviously, when you're growing things, it takes 48 hours for it to grow. If you're just testing for the presence of something, it's just a matter of time of running the test. This bill that's being pushed through the state actually just recognizes that the EPA method is an appropriate method if the county Department of Environmental Health, which are actually the agency that will be implementing these type of tests, can demonstrate through sufficient studies that it is equivalent or better at protecting public health than the existing method. So the science behind whether or not this method is actually better or not is not actually there yet. This legislation supports agencies like the County Environmental Health to specifically look at this method and if it's applicable for specific sites. The nature of this type of test, this molecular-based test, is that it's better in some areas than it is in others. And before this test can even become acceptable as an equivalent alternative to the existing methods, then there needs to be this analysis at a site-by-site sampling location. So the county just can't sample what is going on in Imperial Beach and then apply the test in La Jolla. You have to do what's going on in La Jolla and then use the test in La Jolla, what's going on in Imperial Beach, what's going on in Imperial Beach. So it would actually be rather expensive for the county to do a special study at each sampling location, but for certain places that have persistent exceedances in bacteria where you really want to have a more accurate positive or negative result back sooner, places maybe like Imperial Beach or Coronado or other places, then this legislation actually supports, yeah, you can move forward and you can study it.
I guess just asking you to speculate what the chances of something like this passing are.
It passed unanimously. I understand that of one of the houses. I think it passed unanimously out of the Assembly, and I think it's headed to the Senate.
The odds are that it's going to pass. It's got the support. I think what Chris really is bringing to us, and we probably have to watch, is if the county is unwilling to go do these comparison things, is that we have to debate and discuss and make sure we're asking for the right thing, of whether we want to have them pick a site someplace along our coast. but I don't think that's, you anticipate that for a little while. There's a lot more study going on before then, correct?
Yeah, many more steps before then.
Could you give us any time frame? No, I know that. So I guess we want you to keep an eye on it, because if there's a benefit for us, that's the real thing for us too. We good? So then we have before us is a motion to send a letter of support. All right. Motion and a second. Could we please vote?
Motion carried unanimously.
Thank you. I believe that brings us to the end of the agenda. We have pushed back your closed session for this time? Okay. Meeting